All right, it's time to get us all started. Welcome and thanks to all of you for attending this Neustar webinar produced by InsideARM.com. Our topic is on optimizing collection operations, focusing on combating cell blocking technology and improving contact strategies. I'll introduce you to our two panelists, Matt Edmonds and John G. Senna, both from Neustar. Matt Edmonds is an executive director for Neustar Operational Intelligence Solutions, where he is focused on leveraging identity-related data and intelligence for smarter and safer contact strategies. Matt has over 20 years of unique contact center experience with both the operations and technology sides of the business, and has worked extensively throughout his career with third-party collections leaders and companies. He spent nearly 10 years at Capital One, building and leading various teams, including running all of collections outsourcing, before moving to the contact center technology business. Matt spearheaded sales and solutions at Soundbite Communications during the high growth period of cloud customer contact technology, then later sold the business to Genesys. At Genesys, Matt led the outbound communication sales and solutions team for over 3 years. John G. Senna. With 20 plus years experience in the communication industry, John G. Senna drives innovative solutions to create business value for enterprises and service providers. At Neustar, John G. leads go-to-market strategies to evolve, advance, and deploy trusted identity, communication, and service fulfillment solutions. Previously, John G. held the position of VP Marketing at TEOCO, VP Market Strategy at Ventrac, and VP Products and Technology at AceCom. And finally, hi, I am Mike Bevel, your moderator and Director of Education for the IA Institute and the Compliance Professionals Forum. I have 3 pieces of housekeeping to share with everyone. The first is, please note the questions box available to you. All of your mics have been muted. However, you can send your questions via this chat box at any time during this presentation, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. The webinar is being recorded, and it will be up on Inside ARM's website later this week for rewatching. You'll also be receiving some additional information from Neustar. And the final piece of housekeeping I'm going to do is I'm going to read some legalese on the record. This information shared in this webinar is not intended to be legal advice, but simply informed opinions from our panel and may not be used as legal advice. Legal advice must be tailored to the specific circumstances of each case. Every effort has been made to assure this information is up to date. It is not intended to be a full and exhaustive explanation of the law in any area, however, nor should it be used to replace the advice of your own legal counsel. With that out of the way, I'm going to hand things over to this esteemed panel to give us some background on today's topic and get us started. Matt Edmonds, I believe you're up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I know what we're going to talk about are some really hot topics around contact intelligence and call blocking, et cetera. So hopefully this will be really valuable. We probably have 30 to 40-ish minutes of content here, and then I know there'll be some Q&A. So let me go through just a couple of the main themes or topics we're going to cover. So I'll start with this idea that certainly works for me, and I found kind of works for other people, which is collections contact strategy today. To me, it's very similar to the game of Battleship. So I've got a number of kids. I'm sure many of you out there do as well, or you played Battleship when you were a kid. So what's the most frustrating part of Battleship? It's that you have no intelligence as to where the ships are, right? So there's white pegs everywhere. Like, to me, that is collections contact strategy. It's throwing a bunch of white pegs out there with manual dialing, predictive dialing, et cetera, and just hoping you land and get a red peg. So what we're going to talk about is how do you do a strategy so that you have fewer white pegs and smarter data around device behavior. So I'll highlight those 2 words really: device behavior, that enables you to be more precise, fewer white pegs, faster red pegs. And finally, John G's really going to talk a bunch about this call blocking issue, which has really gotten huge since probably October-ish of last year, and just progressively worse, crushing contact rates. However, there is a holistic solution out there available, and we'll talk about what that is. So, getting into the meat of this a little bit. Sorry, there's a little delay. I'm trying to advance the slide, and it doesn't seem to be advancing. There we go. So there's really 4 parts, debatable, but really 4 main parts of effective contact strategy, and we're going to touch on all these in different proportions. So there's identify who to contact, prioritize what number and how much to call, refine when to contact them, and then finally the reach part, how to contact them. So we're going to spend most of our time on the last 3. We'll talk a little bit about identify as well, but these are the pieces that sort of frame up the content. And before I dive into each of these or all of these, I'm going to step back just for a second. And for those perhaps unfamiliar with Neustar, I'm just going to do a very brief introduction. We are well known across the U.S. and North America for our identity solution. And we have, as you can see depicted here, just this vast amount of data and database we've built. But there's parts that are particularly unique that come into play for what we're going to talk about today. So on the right, number 1, the first bullet is that if you didn't know this, we work with all the top 10 banks and collections and retailers and healthcare companies as well, and many agencies. So a lot of the data and the solutions we're talking about today are proven companies that are have the same issues and challenges as you. And where we have some really unique assets to leverage are particularly around wireless data and wireless numbers and phone activity. So if you go actually to the 4th bullet, you can see where it says management of more than 90% of US caller ID. So I just want to talk about this piece because this is critical to everything we're going to talk about today. Most people don't know this, but as it says, 90% of caller ID in the US actually dips into Neustar. So that means if John G. Senna calls me right now in my home office, there's a 90+% chance that comes actually through Neustar. So the ending carrier that I'm contracted with is dipping into Neustar for, okay, who is calling Matt and presenting that information? Okay, so why is that relevant? Why does that matter to this? The reason that matters and is so relevant is then that means that Neustar actually has data and intelligence on device usage and activity. So that's the key part, really of a lot of this. We call it our, caller ID exhaust. And so where most people know Neustar, a lot around identity, TCPA solutions, the biggest growth actually in the company that's been occurring over the last 12 months has been in this intelligent contact space. And the next slide, if we get to it, is the only other slide that depicts a few of our solutions. And Mike, I don't know if you can advance your slide. I'm sorry, it seems to be intermittent. And go one more. So this is the last slide just about some of the solutions. Really the top 3 blue buckets are what we're going to focus on today. So there's sort of this optimized realm and de-risking realm, but up in optimize is really what we're going to talk about, is getting the best, most complete and accurate numbers, the best number, time of day to call, and how do you work around numbers being blocked and tagged. And then on the right are just some of the name of the products. I may inadvertently call those out, not intending to, just sort of by habit, but just so you get a picture of this suite of solutions all around outbound dialing. Okay, so now we can move into the heart of what we came to talk about today. And I'm going to start with actually some proof points. And Mike, if you can go to the next slide. These are actual sound bites from customers around the relevance of activity. device activity into contact strategy. So look at the very first bullet. It takes 2,537 dials for one promise to pay on phones that show no activity, but only 178 for a promise to pay on phones that are consistently active. And that's insights that can be provided. The third bullet, active landlines have almost a 5x higher RPC rate than inactive lines. I mean, it's pretty intuitive as well, right? But these are actual proof points. The fourth one, 10% of dials made to phones with no activity. And then the final one, by scaling back dialing efforts on inactive phones, you can eliminate 20% of your dials. So the point here, and these are just a small sample, is that there is a direct correlation of phone active and usage rate to contact rate. And maybe the real life example to think about is, if you called me, I have a landline phone right now through my Verizon bundle. So you might do some skip tracing and see that 804 blank, 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 ties to Matt Edmonds. You could call that number all day long, all month long, all year long. I'm never answering that phone. But if you had the intelligence to know that I never use that phone, that it's never active, you would never call it, right? So you're wasting time. It's the same kind of thing with my dad's cell phone. My dad never uses his phone. Like, he sees it as a thing that's there to call 911 if he needs it. But if you did some skip tracing, you may find out, oh, that's tied to David Edmonds. We're going to call him on that number. But he's never active on that phone. So you're wasting time calling it. So those are just some of the examples. All right, so let's dig into a little bit more data. If you can go to the next slide. So these are some quality groups, and I can't go into the detail as it's proprietary of what is in each of these quality groups, but rest assured, it's the foundation of each one is based on some identity components, phone activity and usage, and other proprietary variables. So let me kind of walk you through left to right. So we put them in, there's 9 quality group buckets, and we put them into sort of 3 core groups. The second column count is the number of dials. This is actual customer data. Actual dials by quality group. The third column is the percent of the dials. Fourth, look at the RPC rate slope in the quality groups. The percent of RPCs and the RPC rate and dials per RPC. Really easy to see the slope across these. And we see this every time. I've probably, just this year, I'm sure we've done 15 or 20 plus analysis for collections companies of their portfolio. And the slope is almost identical every time, where activity and usage is at the heart of this. If you look in the lower left, you can see this company is doing 3 million dials in the GHNI, where there's almost no RPCs. It's a total, really waste of time. And this is kind of analysis we do on portfolios all the time and for free. So go to the next slide. And this sort of depicts, okay, well, how would that translate into results? And you can see, you could decide where you want to be on this scale. What I've called out here is that you can get 99% of the RPCs with 81% of the dials by leveraging these quality groups that are derived heavily from activity and usage, and then some other variables we create. Maybe it's a high yield portfolio, and maybe you're in first place, and maybe you just need some margin, and you'd want to forgive a few RPCs and make a lot more money. So maybe you want to be in the middle of this graph at the 95% for 65% of the dials. But it sort of shows you the power of it, that you can either save money and or increase speed to RPC. So now the next slide actually says, okay, now we can do this better by improving the quality of your portfolio. So imagine being able to improve the quality of your placements, or if you're, let's say, buying debt, the quality of your overall portfolio you're working, that's kind of what this does. So what I'm showing here in this chart is that we found this activity piece so powerful, is that we will append or provide new numbers that are of the green quality, right? So of better quality to each of the groups. What you see in the middle column where it says an input phone is best. So that's where this client had 32,655 phones by quality group. But then the next column shows where could we leverage our intelligence to provide a phone number that's verified to the person and active and being used that's better than what the customer already has. So we're able to provide almost 6,000 new unique numbers that this collections company did not already have that we verified is better than what they have. So what's the so what of that? You go to the next slide, and then this is where now you've changed the dynamics of your portfolio. So on the right half, notice the column that says with appends is now larger in the green than the column that says without the appends. So we've shifted the portfolio. So now in the green bucket, where there's the highest amount of RPCs, you've gone from about 23,000 accounts in the green quality to 27,000, about a 15% improvement. Down in the bottom right, you'll see what it does to the whole portfolio by shifting more to the green. You've increased your overall RPC rate from 8.1% to 9%. 355 more accounts, increasing your RPC rate 11%. So that's the power dynamic of leveraging this data to improve your overall quality. So then the next two slides just show a couple case studies from this. This is an actual customer quote of one of the largest telco media companies using this, that's been using this data for a while. And it's pretty easy to see that the dark blue lines are the after, and the lighter sort of green were sort of the before using the data, right? And lifts across the board on earlier stage collections, cure rates, payment rates, et cetera. The next slide goes into a little more detail. Another customer, same thing. They actually wanted to create 4 groups. One more, click one more. They created 4 quality groups: best, better, bad, and worst. I think the key thing to point out here is really just the slope is consistent. The right party contact rates from left to right, the dollars collected per dial, and the percent of RPCs. This one, I wouldn't promise this to everybody, right? But 60% increase in RPCs, 110% increase in collection rate. Again, I wouldn't promise that to anybody, but still phenomenal results, just being smarter on their strategy. So then the last piece before I pass it off to John G is really this refine component. How do you refine when to contact? So best time to contact has been around a while, right? I've been in this business a long time, as many of you have. But we take a totally different slant or intelligence to best time to contact. And it's stemming from that caller ID exhaust, so we know when phones are active. What you're seeing in the middle here is actual customer data of time windows, and then a summary of the portfolio and the percentages of when the phones are active on this portfolio. Now, what's important to point out is, look, this is not some big aha that, the slope of the aggregate of 21% are very active between 10 and 12, and, a higher percent kind of in the afternoon. That's not some huge aha. And this is not some huge shift your staffing analysis. Here's what's critical. What's critical is which accounts, which phone numbers are most active between 8 and 10 a.m. and 10 to 12. If you just take some macro approach, you might shift some staffing around a little bit, but you wouldn't really gain the most of it. The key is building your dialer file or your calling file or calling up accounts prompted to agents to know which account is most active at which time. So the bottom is actually the output that we give to people. So phone number 561-85XXX is most active on Mondays between 2 and 4. It's most active Tuesdays between 10 to 12, etc. And I can tell you without a doubt, every single analysis I've ever seen we've done for a customer is that there is absolute, almost linear slope, right, when you're dialing best time and leveraging quality groups to when you're not, like in terms of the lift. So we have customers building their campaign saying, hey, give me all of my accounts where the best time to call is within this window. And you build a campaign then, or again, you're popping it up to manual dials. So one more slide on this that actually shows the result. So this is a customer of example results comparing the time a phone was dialed to our most active window. So in this case, 15% of the dials occurred during what we said was the most active time for the phone, and 85% did not. Look in the middle of the screen, the RPC rate. When phone numbers were dialed during the most active time, the RPC rate was 89% higher, so 3.4%, versus when they were dialed outside of what we said the most active time was. So that's this, huge lift in calling at the most active times. So then now I'm going to go two last slides here, and I'll pass it to John G. So now I'm going to come back to that one chart I showed of this that showed how many RPCs for how many dials. This does not even take into account the append component I talked about. This is strictly leveraging the quality groups and best time to call. So the quality groups said get 99% on 81% of the dials. Now, if you overlay actually best time to call based on activity, you're getting to 99% of the dials, 99% of the RPCs for 77%, or just right at 100% of the RPCs for 89% of the dials. Or go to the left in the middle, 95% of the RPCs for 61% of the dials. That's huge margin and huge, money improvement. So the final slide, just one case study of this. This was a top 5 bank, financial services company. So one of the largest, who's already, as you can imagine, and many of you probably work with, very sophisticated in terms of who they leverage for skip tracing and how they score accounts and all of those things. So they deployed these quality groups and best time to call and gave us these actual results: 16% fewer dials, 9% more RPCs, 24% increase in RPC rate. And actually, we haven't even produced a slide on it, but another large financial institution, probably top 10 or 15, gave similar results last week, quoting a 30 to 35% improvement. I just don't have all of the details in that documented, but it's real and the slope works tremendously. So that's the get smarter on the contact strategy for who to contact, prioritization, and refining the reach. So now I'm going to pass it off to John G., who is going to get into that on the reach piece, how to contact with respect to call blocking, caller ID, and some of the stuff we're seeing there. So John G., I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Matt, and hello to everybody here today. So as we start looking at at the strategy of how we reach the customers, we really come face to face with this fact that we're all facing today, and that's this idea that just customers don't trust phone calls. And there's a very broad reason for why that's happening. Most people are familiar with robocalls today. They're the #1 consumer complaint. 1,000 a second just last year. It's the top complaint to the consumer. A lot of money is lost there, and everybody should be familiar. This is all over the news today. And what that leads to today is really how it exhibits itself in the problem for the enterprises. And this cuts across all industries, but one of the metrics that we've found working with Boston Consulting Group is fundamentally only 1 in 10 calls that you make from business to a consumer get answered. And what's happening now is, with all the new developments happening in the industry, some of that's actually getting worse. So just last year, I know some of you are members of PACE. They'd announced that some of their memberships had actually experienced an additional 20% decline in contact rates in roughly that same timeline that Matt identified, in that since about October. As we quantify what this means to some of our customers, well, depending on the industry, sometimes one missed call could be up anywhere from $75 to $150 of additional cost simply by not making that contact. And what you'll see is, as people start providing solutions to address that, there's another side of this, that the idea of stopping and blocking calls has kind of a unwanted impact. And that's when you actually query consumers. So we ran surveys with consumers on whether they answer or not. 75% of them say, you know what, I really should have picked up that call. That was the call I wanted to miss. I just didn't pick up because I didn't trust it. And by sort of getting a feel for what they want is if you can actually help consumers understand who is calling and why they're calling, there's a much bigger chance, and 88% have indicated that that would dramatically improve their chances of answering the call. So, next slide. So in response to all of this, what you're finding is that the telecom industry, specifically a lot of the mobile operators and even some of the landline customers, have started rolling out solutions to address the problem of robocalls and scam that you see. I've listed a couple here that many of you are probably familiar with. AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint, and Verizon have all rolled out some form of call protect or scam protection or spam alerts that identify robocalls. And the primary purpose there is to notify a customer. They will have some type of label that indicates. FiOS is on the landline side of the house, similar concept, less visual, but still it provides some type of indication in the case of a prefix that indicates spam, as an example. There are many other providers. Nomo Robo is a very common solution that's available on many of the other landline and cable companies. And if you look on the mobile app store, there's probably over 500 mobile apps that provide over-the-top type of controls. Next slide, please. So the problem with starting to offer these solutions to protect customer is the impact. So if you understand what is allowable in these cases, carriers now are allowed to block calls from specific, very specific use cases of fraud likely numbers. And this is part of the FCC ruling in November 2017 for numbers that are either invalid, unassigned, or unallocated. The other angle that you start seeing is consumers are now starting to adopt many of these 500 mobile apps that we have. And part of them, the job of these platforms are really to score, detect, and flag. And in some cases, they allow a consumer to actually block some of those calls. The impact, as all of us see in our industry, and not just in the collections industry, is that legitimate business calls today are sometimes getting blocked and more often mislabeled in error. The challenges when this happens is that customers, the enterprises that are making the call, are sometimes unaware that the call was in fact blocked. The consumer you were trying to reach is not even aware that the call was attempted. And today, just because of where it's in the industry, there's really no standard process for how you resolve that conflict of the mislabeling or what the appropriate label should be. Next slide, please. So one of the other problems that we see in addition to all of this is this whole idea of caller ID. So Matt talked about the caller ID solutions that are provided. Caller ID is fantastic coverage really across a lot of the consumer space. But if you look at the business information, it tends not to be quite as strong. And in some of the use cases that we've seen, you'll see a couple of areas. Sometimes when a call is made from a business, it just shows up as blank, nothing there. Or it might say something generic like wireless carrier. It might have something like a city, state, or unavailable. In some other cases, you're going to see other types of caller ID with an actual name. But when you have thousands of numbers, some of those caller IDs are probably not standard, and they'll probably show themselves in two specific ways. In one case, they might simply be inconsistent. So what we're showing you on the bottom left part here is just examples of how the company with let's say ABC Corporation might actually show up in multiple ways, just an inconsistent way of displaying the company name. Or on the right-hand side, which is probably worse, you're getting names that are completely unallocated, that are unrelated to the actual brand at hand. So next slide, please. So let me give you an example of some of the metrics that we've seen as we've started working with enterprises that are starting to understand what's going on, trying to see what they can do to address this. So this was essentially an analysis we made of a recent customer. We looked at about 10,000 of their phone numbers. They made about 12 million calls over a 5-month period. And let's look at some of the metrics that we looked at here in the middle, which referred to the pie chart. Of all the calls that we saw during that period, over half those calls had no caller ID. It was either blank, unavailable, or some other variation. About a third of them, the purple part of this, only showed city states. And about 10% of the calls actually had the actual name. and 5% of that, or 4% of that, actually was flat out incorrect. Now, depending on the industry and depending what's good, this may be good or this may be bad. And specifically in the collections industry, what you should display is going to help drive some of these answer rates, and that's in the very early stages. I'll touch on that in the next couple of slides. But let's go down further. If you look down on the bottom third of the other chart here, what are some of the other things we found with this company? So in looking at these 9,500 numbers that they had, those numbers were actually serviced by 12 different phone companies. And that's important because their process of how they store, what they do from a caller ID, whether they expose it, and whether or not they provide individual names or generic names has a significant impact, which means now this company has to worry about how 12 different people deal with caller ID. As we looked into their actual numbers by volume, we looked at the top 10, top 15, 13 of those 15 were actually being mislabeled as spam or being categorized as spam. And that mislabeling actually occurred across all 4 of the mobile operators. Next slide. So this is just a further breakdown. We've masked the phone numbers here, the top 10, but what you'll see here is on a number by number basis. We're showing you the call volume generated by that actual number that they own and showing you what actually shows up on the phone that's being called. So the number one number, the most volume, actually had caller ID populated in many of the calls. But the other 9 numbers actually either just had unavailable or city and state. Next slide, please. This is now looking for still the same set of numbers, 1 through 10 are the same, 1 through 10 earlier. We then took a look across what was that actual experience to the end user as we reached out to the mobile terminations to mobile numbers. And if you look at this again, 13 of the 15 were either being marked as potential spam, robocaller, debt collector, etc. Scam likely. Next slide, please. And how this exhibits itself kind of looks like this. Depending on the service that you're going to get some level of these. And these are the primary or the leading mobile app providers that you're going to see will have some variation of this. But in all those cases, the message that it delivers is that this is potentially an untrusted number, and thus the reason why calls aren't being picked up. Next slide, please. So I'm going to transition to a couple of the different solutions that Neustar brings to market within our caller ID portfolio. And we have a service that we call caller name optimization, which is really trying to impact the caller ID display. And we do this because of our role in the industry. We have the ability to impact that across about 850 different service providers. We also will forward this information on to the mobile app providers so that they can be used in their analytics. But the primary purpose of this as a brand is when you look at the names that are inconsistent, when you look at the ones that are missing, the ability to identify or standardize the name that you present is then offered to you in a single central platform that gets pushed into industry. You could standardize that, so use a single number. You could break that out into regions or functions, for example, sales versus customer care. And you even have the ability to break this down on a per extension basis. Most of the work we're seeing today tends to be more at the standardization or by department or by function today. The primary goal of doing this is just to ensure that that information is being presented not as they're stored across all the 12 or 15 or 800 carriers, but how the brand that owns the number actually wants it to install. So that is what will override the information that's currently in the ecosystem. And we're placing that control directly with a brand. Next slide, please. The other aspect of providing those information and managing your name, you're fundamentally registering the number. So part of the engagement that we have is that we take the information that you have of all the numbers. We make sure that we verify the numbers are actually owned by the company, and we will push that across to the ecosystem. The reason of doing this is really the idea of providing verified and registered numbers to the mobile app providers and the carriers so that they can use it in their analytics. The reasoning here is if it's verified, then a number coming from that should generally be should be of acceptable use. Now, here's what actually happens. There's some conversations of people that use the term whitelisting, and from what we're seeing in the industry, whitelisting is not a guaranteed service. What it's actually doing is a best effort notification to those providers, because a lot of the analytic firms, a lot of the mobile app companies continue, depending on the usage that they see, depending on other behavior, that classification may get changed. The second step of registering that information is we also recommend this idea of blacklisting the inbound only numbers. And this is really to prevent spoofing. Many companies have a lot of public numbers, probably on the website. And so in some ways, those are available to many people publicly that can be spoofed. So anytime you see a call that actually originates from some of these inbound only numbers, you know that you have it makes sense to actually stop that call. So the primary purpose, again, is provide a central platform, manage the information that you have, distribute it to all the mobile apps, distribute it to the different carriers, and then allow them to use that as part of their analytics functions. Next slide, please. So part of the angle of why we're doing what we're doing is this idea of, look, if what you're trying to do is improve this information, then what this allows you to do is personalize and contextualize this on a per outreach basis. So this is a generic view of where we think this is going, again, depending on the industry. So collections, for example, has different challenges in terms of what you display. But what we're seeing across all industries is this idea of how do you provide relevant and contextual information that's both visual and identifies the context for that call. I think that's everything on my side. Matt, do you want to pick up from there?
Yep, sure. Actually, go back. Yeah, so just kind of key takeaways. We'll wrap up and answer questions. You know, first, quality is better than quantity. So go back to my battleship metaphor, right, on data and things about appends and using all the scoring intelligence and the caller name and ID intelligence. You know, stop having so many white pegs out there. There's solutions. So number two takeaway is that device and phone activity intelligence, it is absolutely proven to provide a significant lift, and it's unique. Third, dialing by active time windows is also by device has also been proven to increase ROI. And it's different it's unique to the phone number. So it's not scoring things in aggregate. It's not time windows in aggregate. It's going to be different for every customer, every phone number. And then finally, there is this holistic solution to registering numbers across all carriers. You saw on one of Janji's slides, 850, 900 carriers out there. And then you can manage the caller ID and there's, the constant monitoring of making sure your numbers as best we can are not getting blocked, and you get more contact in conjunction with everything else before that with the data and quality groups. So those are hopefully the key takeaways you got before I even said them. And I hope folks did some head nodding and some sort of, I didn't know that. Maybe there was some combination. And with that said, I'll turn it back to maybe Mike to facilitate a little Q&A.
Absolutely. I have some questions that I'd like to run by you. The first one I'm going to throw out for either of you. How does the best time to call align with Fdcpa guidelines regarding when you can dial for a collections call?
Yeah, I'll take that. This is Matt. I guess the best way to answer that is, look, you have to comply with the Fdcpa guidelines of when you can call, after 8, not after, certain times, different states. That's all up to you and your dialing strategy. What we're doing with the best time to call is we'll show you in your portfolio all of the numbers of the most active window by day. But really, if it's not within the approved, legal dialing windows, we're not going to return that window to say, call it at 3 a.m. Now, I don't know that I've actually seen us do an analysis where an individual phone number's most active time was outside of the legal calling windows. I haven't seen that yet. It theoretically could happen, but it's up to you to execute on it. You know, we'll provide the window, but within the legal guidelines of when to call. So hopefully that answers the question.
It does. I think the other thing, this is just Mike being curious and saying this, but the solution is really for, that's not the way I want to say this. I think the Fdcpa is important to keep in mind, but also there are some companies, certainly creditors and first-party collectors, who could use different strictures around them that maybe aren't necessarily Fdcpa. So it's interesting to see how those two ecosystems relate to each other.
Yeah, the one other thing I forgot to mention on the best time to call, I'll just point out here real quick as well. Go back to the quality groups I talked about, just green, yellow, red for right now.
Mm-hmm.
As you might infer, the best time to call is even more impactful for the yellow and red, right? So the greens are sort of, I'm not saying best time to call doesn't matter for the green, but there's just less of a delta. There's a delta or improvement for best time to call, but it's the really hard to contact ones, the harder to contact ones in the yellow and red that you still have to call. You know, you still have minimum standards from your clients of you've got to touch each account X amount of times per day or per week. I mean, I know all those things exist, but that's where the best time to call becomes even more precise, even more powerful for those accounts.
I have another question that's for you, Matt, if you don't mind staying on the line with me. What is the definition of active? Is it when there are actual contacts, talk times, or voicemail connects as well?
Yeah, the definition of active and what we are able to capture and observe in our data is actually when that phone is making an outbound call, or attempting and or making an outbound call. Now, people will say, well, wait, but we're calling them. It's an inbound call. I understood. But again, in the data that you can see, and we prove this out many times over, there is this direct linear correlation to when the phone is active and being used to when somebody actually answers the phone. But the definition of active here is the phone is being used by the consumer.
Perfect. John G., I have a question I'd like to throw your way. Do you have visibility and the ability to notify the company if someone is illegally spoofing numbers you own?
Yeah, this one is a tough question just because of where the industry is today. The overall answer right now is today this is not yet solved by industry, and there are incremental solutions that address it. So on an individual basis, a spoofed number and knowing when that happened, given what is currently deployed in the carrier space, the answer is generally no. In terms of what's actually being done to provide it, a lot of this information when calls are being spoofed are really being determined by the use of analytics rather than anything certified or definite. And so they're using a lot of patterns and volumes and analysis. So we've seen some cases like this where we had a customer that gave us registered numbers. We provided it. We pushed it out to the ecosystem, and they were registered numbers. But even though we accounted for seasonality and the volumes rose, we saw a dramatic spike in the number. And we exchanged that with some of the analytics companies. And what we tracked down is we figured that call was probably being spoofed. And so even though it was a live and registered and verified number, the fact that the volume was well beyond all the metrics we expected, accounting for seasonality, we still flagged it. And then we notified all the other partners that we had to say, look, we think this number is being spoofed. You need to flag this. We also informed the carrier that, the enterprise, that this is happening, and they took that number out of rotation and added other things. Now, what I've described so far isn't an automatic on a per call basis yet. That's sort of being done through analytics. Where the industry is starting to move towards is the idea of digital certificates. Much in the same way that you can sign online transactions, we're starting to look at things of how to sign phone calls. And there is a technology known as Stir Shaken, which are really technology standards of how you can digitally sign phone calls. That is a standard that Neustar co-wrote. And a lot of the testing in industry is really between many different operators. There is an industry test bed that people are doing testing. And the idea of that is to detect it on a per call basis. It is still in its early stages, but the FCC has actually approved recommendations from the industry to accelerate that. And they've laid out a timeline of roughly about a year when they'd like to see that already starting to get rolled out.
All right. I have another one for you, John G, if you don't mind. Are you
Sure.
registering with all of the analytics companies in the 500 app providers? If not, how many and what can I do with the ones you are not registering with?
Oh, yeah, like everything else, you know, numbers are a little bit confusing. If you look at the people that provide mobile app coverage, there's of the 500 apps, if you look at this first from a North American perspective, if you're looking at the top four mobile operators, which account for probably 95% of the 400 plus million mobile phones, those will be served by really a handful of mobile app providers, and we work with all of those today. So we have agreements with most of them. Some of them we're doing pilots with them, so we're exchanging data with them. We do not generally have the full interface with any of those 500, specifically the OTT apps, the apps that are sort of over the top and not necessarily provided by the carriers themselves. So short answer, no. We have a handful, but those handful probably hit 90+% of all the mobiles.
All right. Matt, regarding best time of call, are you analyzing them based off if they are a landline or a wireless number?
Yes, I mean those are absolutely components. So it doesn't matter whether it's landline, or mobile. So we're able to see the activity and usage in there. So it's the analysis and intelligence we would provide back would cover both.
Perfect. Another one for you, Matt, is if numbers are active outside of Fdcpa guidelines, that info is important as well because it IDs second or third shift people. So you do not track and report?
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly give the intel back. Well, what we give back is the most active window in a day. So the only way, like I said before, I guess if the most active window was 11 p.m. to 12 a.m., you would in fact get that back. Again, I haven't sort of seen that, but I guess it would happen because we're giving one window per day is kind of how we found it to be most consumable today, quite frankly, but on dialers and things. So we would give you that and you'd have that. What you do and how you act on the data, again, is up to you, and then how you launch your dialer campaigns and everything else. So you would get the intelligence if a window outside of the time was the most active. I just kind of haven't seen it yet.
Understood. John G, how do we prevent getting blocked by mobile apps and phone companies?
Yeah, I think the word prevent is kind of one of the areas. Like I said, it is not a guaranteed name as you register and provide that, because the analytics will change depending on usage. But really what we recommend is, you start through the standard process. Make sure that your names are what they need to be. Register the ones that you make outbound calls. Register the ones that shouldn't be generating calls so that you can address some of those things. And then there's practices that we then recommend. So for example, dedicating or reserving certain number ranges for specific programs or specific campaigns or functions makes sense. And part of that is because a lot of the analytics companies sort of retain history on the usage of that phone to see what happens. So when you see a rapid changing, it kind of throws off the potential score for it. And so really dedicating that makes sense. Now, there are other things to keep in mind. So one of the other things that we're seeing is it's hard to I think one of the questions that I've also been asked is, hey, well, what should we put on there? What is the name that makes the most sense? That is still being worked out. And so by providing the tools that we provide, one of the other conversations we're having with the customers is, look, this is a platform for you to manage and control in a central platform. You know, test, measure, do A/B testing and see what works, because at this point we're still very early on and we're trying to figure out what works, as well as trying to understand how consumers respond to that. In some cases, maybe keeping the city-state might actually make sense for rather than actually putting a specific name for it. The other areas that we've seen is some of the ways that the industry is moving towards some level of standardization is maybe using something more generic along the lines of account services or account servicing, rather than something like collections, which will violate some of the third-party disclosure type rules. And then finally, there is one other thing that you have. We talked about mobile apps. Some of these apps are actually intended to block calls. So they're for stopping unwanted calls. There's really, at least in where we play, we don't get to affect those. So if somebody wants to, completely block any number of calls based on a certain profile that's offered by the mobile app, we don't have an impact to that.
All right. Matt, how have other collection companies deployed best time to call in actual campaigns?
I'd say the most common, when I think about a couple of the use cases I talked about here and others, at least on the best time to call, that was the specifics of the question, tends to be, aggregating as much within a like client portfolio in a certain time. So let's say they're going to build a 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. campaign. And we've returned in that daily file, here's all of the accounts where we said 10 to 12 was best time to call. And actually, just for some of the smaller companies, a lot of times we see people also put into that campaign they're going to launch at 10 o'clock. They put in the 8 to 10s they didn't reach and the 12 to 2s they didn't reach. So we've still found a pretty decent correlation, even if you go just a little bit outside the perfect window, if you want to get a more critical mass of accounts. But if you've got a critical mass, or you get some, you build this, I'm going to launch this campaign at 10 a.m., you assign your agent X number of agents to that dialer file, you tend to get very high contact rates. So you've got to run your dialer slower if you're running a dialer, not doing manual. Anyway, and then we've also seen a lot of companies then run a secondary campaign in the background. So most pretty up-to-date dialers can run a secondary campaign in the background for then all the other numbers that don't necessarily have that window, but they just want to keep agents busy. So I've seen people, kind of do that. That's probably the best, without going into a tremendous amount of like dialer strategy detail right now. That's probably the most common thing that I've heard people do. Back to you, Mike.
I did that thing where I was on mute. I am so sorry. And I asked the question. I will do it again. John G, can your calls still be labeled as collection or account services, etc., once you are registered?
Yeah, this one is probably I think this is a TBD from a how the industry is behaving. So let's sort of look at how labeling gets happened today. We're actually talking about two different types of labels. The idea of spam or robocall or fraud is sort of a fraudulent indicator of sorts, whereas something like collections or account services tends to be more of a business categorization. And we have a perspective that in our view, those are separate and distinct, and they can both be applied. But it depends on who the mobile app provider is at the end. So let's talk about the four major apps. Today, the short answer to that question is yes, right? If that is changed back, there's still the ability. But that said, that's part of the process we're working with the industry and the different analytics apps to sort of arrive at some common understanding of how calls should get labeled in terms of the business categories that they apply in, as well as how you then reflect some kind of notification for a possible fraudulent access.
All right. I think I have maybe two more questions, unless you guys have found another one, and then let's get through these. John G, I'm going to ask you, how do we know or measure the impact of the false blocks that our company may be experiencing?
I love this question because it's actually very hard to answer today. A lot of the answers in terms of specific certified, how do you know you're being spoofed? How do you know you're being blocked? Those are technical challenges that the industry is trying to solve today. There is no standard way today to get this. In some ways, if a carrier is blocking, really in many ways, the only way to get that indication is from carriers, and that is not being publicly provided today. So again, in the absence of definitive answers back to this, a lot of what we're seeing and a lot of what we're doing with clients is really using analytics to sort of measure sort of A/B testing before and after, see what's going on, volumes of calls, comparing it to history and other things. But there is no standard way right now, and that's what a lot of the industry conversations are today.
Right. Matt, does Neustar provide their skipped phones and provide analytics on the existing phones as well?
Yes, I guess I kept using the term append and not skip per se, but going into the earlier part of what I talked about, where we provide these unique phones, where we have generally the way we do it is people just want us to provide, if we have an active and verified phone for that consumer that's different than what you already have, then to append it back or skip it back. So, and that, did you say something for landlines and wireless, Mike? Or no? Am I getting my questions confused?
I think
what was it? Skip tracing,
skipped phones, and provide analytics on the existing phones as well.
Oh, okay, yeah. Provide analytics on the existing phones. Yeah. So I'd say what we've done a ton of is agency says, hey, here I've got these 50,000 phones, or just like the analysis I showed, I've got the 30,000 phones. Tell me what quality groups they show up in, and tell me which. Also, you could provide a better verified or active phone than what I have, and how and where do all my existing numbers fall in sort of these quality groups. So yeah, absolutely, and that's part of just, quite frankly, free analysis or portfolio analysis will do for anybody.
Perfect. I have another one for you. Do you perform a scrub to identify cell phones ported versus not ported and landlines?
Yes. So, we've got all the intelligence out there on numbers that are ported and not ported. We do things in a batch sort of basis where customers want to know multiple times, a month or a quarter, et cetera, what's been ported or not back and forth. And we also do a ton of where a lot of the companies have evolved, typically, quite frankly, some of the larger companies, for a proactive notification type solution. We're actually monitoring their entire database of phones and consumers. And as soon as we see a change or a port, a line change or a port disconnect, any of that, we push out the change immediately.
All right. I'm going to throw the final question for our time together to John G. In the face of third-party disclosure rules, what caller ID names should we present to consumers?
This is a common conversation with the customers right now. I think the jury's still out in terms of what the right answer is. Obviously, things like debt collector and collections is obviously not something you want to provide. The initial industry standardization that I'm starting to hear about is the idea of this account services. But again, I think in the very early stages where we lie, we're really using the platform that we provide to manage this as a means to test and measure different types of caller names as you present to the client, and then see how the responses are and adapt from there. But it's still very early on in terms of what we're seeing. Matt, do you have any specific comments on that? I know you played a lot in this space as well.
Yeah. I mean, what I'd say, I totally agree with what you'd say. Two things to clarify or add on to. One is the beauty of sort of the platform we give and the sort of the control we give to our customers in the platform to change the ID actually sets up really nicely. We have some customers doing some test and control with various IDs, and you have that kind of flexibility to control that on your own. The other thing I'd say is, to be very frank, just like John G said, look, do we know the best caller ID to use? No. We certainly all know how to make it compliant. But I tell you what we do see consistently are bad, like what not to do. Blank, in every analysis we've done to date, blank performs poorly. Obviously, your things that are getting tagged as spam and all that hurts as well. But with a lot of our collection customers, I think we're kind of going through, and look, I can't tell you 100% of the time putting out ABC Corp is going to be better than the city-state population. But what I do know is all your ones that are showing blank are really bad. Like, we got to fix that. And then let's test some others, ABC Corp, or, everybody's collected, whatever you want to say within limits, and test a couple. But let's get rid of the ones that are obviously bad. And we can also do the analysis if, we've had customers send us the disposition rates on the calls as well. So not only can we do the analysis John G was showing of what is the caller ID being presented, what is being hit as spam, what's being tagged as, debt collector. We actually saw one, no lie, last week I presented to a customer, one of their numbers was actually showing the word extortion. Like, terrible. But anyway, so we can give you that intelligence, but if you also give us the dispositions of the calls, then you can see, we had a higher, RPC, PTP rate on, this one versus that one, which is interesting.
All right. That extortion story is going to stay with me for a while. All right. So I'm going to do the talk off now. Once again, I want to thank everybody in the audience for spending this afternoon with us. Your participation is invaluable, and we really couldn't do these without you guys out there in the audience with us. I also want to thank today's panelists, Matt Edmonds and John G. Senna of Neustar. If you have questions about the content in today's presentation, or if you have suggestions for other webinar topics you'd like to see covered, you can send those to editor@insidearm.com. Matt and John G have also very kindly provided, as you'll see here, email addresses and phone numbers. You can try to write them down quickly now, or as we said at the beginning of the presentation, this is going to be up on Inside ARM by the end of the week, both the playback and a link to the deck. So you have options to send questions directly to Matt or John G, or you can send one to me and I can get it over to them. Some way, someone will hear you, I promise. And that does it. We hope to see you next time. You can safely disconnect from this webinar.